Welcome to Learn Commerce PU online classes. Don't forget to like our video and subscribe our YouTube channel for all the updates.
Welcome to our second PU Computer Science online classes. So in last class, we already learned the concept constructor and destructor, and we know that the meaning of constructor is a special member function and that is used in classes to initialize object of the class automatically. So it is a special member function. It is not a normal member function. It is a special member function, and such function used in our class and using to initialize the object to give some value, to define a value to the object here or construct a value to the data members of the object. So let's see, today we are going to study the use of constructor by using example. And in our example, the first thing going to start, that is by using the header file, hash include iostream.h, and second header file hash include conio.h. The iostream for input and output, conio for our CLR SCR to clear the screen, and maybe when you are going to use any end line or anything, then header file iomanip hash include iomanip.h going to use. Now class is the keyword and using to declare the class. Counter is the name of the class, that is called as the user defined name. And in a class, one member variable, the member variable is the A, and such one going to declare by using data type int, and maybe if any member variables or member data are there, so we are going to declare by using access specifier private. And later whatever the member functions are there, maybe it's a member function, maybe it's a special member function, such one going to declare or define by using the public access specifier. So here I am using one member function, it is a special member function. The name of the special member function, that is called as the counter. Okay, so this is a constructor special member function. How you are going to identify it is a constructor special member function? Why? Because I already said in rules, whatever the name we are adding, providing to the class name, such name is equal to our special member function, that is called as the constructor. So in this example, I used the class name and the constructor name is the same. Okay, and later such constructor is using to initialize the object, correct? Now to initialize value to the object, so I already used the variable, that is the data variable, that is the A, and just only I initialize the value is the A is equal to 0. So the special member function should be, that means the class name and special member function name should be the same, and such a special member function is usable to initialize value to the object. And later next one, the other member functions are that the other member function in class counter are, one is the get underscore count and second one is the inc, that means increment. Okay, so I use just only inc, so increment, that is the inc underscore count here. So two member functions are there, and such the first member function, why? Because here no any declaration, directly I am going to define the member function. If you are using any semicolon, then we can say that it going to declare, but if no any semicolon, that means here we are going to define the member function. So the first member function, that is the get underscore count, such one going to use by using their return type. The return type is the int. Okay, and later next one is the return A, that means whatever the value we adding to the A, such one going to return, return, return here, return A. So here it going to return the value as the 0 here. And later next one, the second member function. So the second member function is the ink underscore count, and just only it going to make the increment. Why? Because we know that a plus plus, that means it going to make the increment a plus plus, that is equal to a plus 1. So 0 plus 1, that means later words it going to make the increment the a value as the 1 here. And maybe if the a value is 1 here, it going to return a is equal to 1, and we already got the answer 1. That means second time it going to add the value 1 plus 1 and going to make the increment. Clear this point here? So this is the, and here we used the floor bracket, so such floor bracket going to close, and later finally the flower bracket with the semicolon going to use, and such one is called as the end of class definition. So this line, the comment line, we can write here as the end of class definition. Okay, so still here we used one member data, and counter is the special member function, and two member functions are, one is the get underscore count and second one is the ink underscore count. And later next one, after that we using the main function. Okay, here the main function, and in main function here just by using the class name is the counter, I am going to declare two objects. The objects are C1 and C2. Okay, the objects are C1 and C2 here, and later whatever I want to display the value for the C1, so just I am going to use the message as the, that means the output operation I want to display. So cout console output here, and C1 dot get underscore count. Why? Because we know that whatever the member function is there going to access the object, correct? No, so the class members, the class member, how we are going to access the member of the class here? The member of the class are, one is the member data and member functions. So just only by using the object we are going to access the member function. So the object C1 and C2. So by using the C1 I am going to access the member function, and C2 also going to access the member function, and also by using C1 and C2 we accessing the another member function. The another member function is the ink underscore count here. Okay, well, it is a simple example of the constructor. Clear this point here? So just I want to tell about our how to initialize. Why we using the constructor function to initialize the value, and finally going to close the bracket here. So maybe some explanation about this program we are going to tell as the here. In case of our or this program segment contains here this constructor special member function, and the special member function with the name our counter, correct? No, why? Because it is a constructor special member function, and what's the name we used here? The name is the counter, and which is same as the class name. Why? Because the first rule of the constructor, the class name and the constructor name should be the same. Why? Because just only to identify to our compiler whether it is a constructor function or not, or which is the constructor function. So this is the first rule. Clear in this case here? And later next one we can say that why we using such a special member function. Such a special member function is used to initialize the value to the data variables. Okay, is using to initialize value to the data variables. And in this program we in main function, in our main function we are defining the two objects of the counter for the class variable. The objects are C1 and C2. Okay, the objects are the C1 and C2. Now the constructor special member function will be called twicely automatically. That means two times we called in this case here, correct? No, here the two times will be called automatically, one for the object C1 and another for the object C2. Okay, so this is the some explanation about our this program. Okay, here simple program here, and the note, important note we can say about the program as when constructor is declared for a class. Why? Because whatever the constructor you are going to declare in a class here. And why we declaring? Why? Because the initialization, to initialize the object of the class. Okay, why we using the constructor? Just only to give value to the object, to initialize value to the object of the class automatically. So this is about our constructor. That means we already know about this example. and the explanation about the example and what about the objects are there in this program, and also the special member function, class name, each and everything. Let's see the next very important concept in our constructor and the destructors. So the types of the constructors. In our constructor there are three types are there. Okay, so what are the types in our constructor? So some of the types in our constructors are, first one is the default constructor, second parameterized constructor, and third is called as about our copy constructor. So there are three types are there in constructor. First default, second one is the parameterized constructor, and third is called as the copy constructor. Now let's see some explanation about our default constructor. Now which constructor is called as the default constructor? So a constructor which does not accept any arguments. Okay, so this is the syntax of the default constructor. So in this syntax, just only for the argument or within parentheses, I didn't use any arguments. So now this is the example of the default constructor. Clear this point here? So we can say that means maybe if you are using and after completing, maybe the constructor name is the student. Okay, if you are not using any argument within the parentheses, then this is the example of the default constructor. Or maybe the second example, maybe if you are using int a, that means it is not called as the default constructor. So what's the meaning of the default constructor? That means a constructor which does not accept any arguments is called as the default constructor. So it not going to accept any argument, so it also known as the our zero constructor also. Clear this point here? So we can say that in this case here, so there are two names are there for our default constructor. One is called as the default constructor and second one is called as the zero argument constructor. Why it is called as the zero argument constructor? Why? Because a constructor which does not accept any argument. So because of this reason it is called as the zero argument constructor. And such a default constructor are useful. Why we using such a default constructor in this case? When the object are need to be created without having to type the initial values. Clear this point here? Otherwise, while going to use any constructor, maybe we are using 10 or the 40. So like that we are giving some initial values. Why? Because such example may be going to clear in our second constructor. The second constructor is the parameterized constructor. So this line, about this line I am going to clear in our second point, that is our parameterized constructor. But also we can say that, why? Because this is the example whatever I said, such a default constructor are useful when objects, whenever the object are need to create but without having to type the initial value. Why? Because here how we are not going to give any initial value to the argument. Whatever the arguments are there, the argument that is equal to 0. So such one is called as the zero argument constructor. That means there is no any arguments, okay, while going to declare the objects. So this is about some explanation, or finally we can say that the default constructor simply allocate the memory space to the data members of the object, okay, but also it not going to initialize any value, okay, not going to initialize any value, but also simply allocating some memory space to the data members of the object. So this is about our default constructor. So about our default constructor means it does not accept any argument. So such constructor is also calling as the zero argument constructor. And why it is very useful? Why? Because here the object are going to create but not having any initial value. When going to create the object, we are not using any initial value for the object here. So this is the usable thing in our default constructor. But also the default constructor simply allocating the memory space to the data members of the object, okay. And later the syntax of the default constructor. So what about the syntax of the default constructor? The syntax is the class name, scope resolution operator, class name, open the parenthesis, int is equal to 0, close the parenthesis. Clear this point here? So this is called as the definition. This is the definition here. So we can say that. Why? Because we already know that the constructor name and class name should be the same. So just only in syntax we need to write as the class name, scope resolution operator, class name, and int is equal to 0, and whatever the explanation coding is there, going to write by using flower bracket and closing of the flower bracket. So this is the syntax. But here I used one comment line. The comment line is the constructor without arguments. Correct? No, in this case here the constructor without argument. Why? Because how I used the arguments, the argument that is equal to int is equal to 0. So here we can say that maybe if you are using int a, that means we can't use such comment line. The comment line is the constructor without argument. Why? Because I already used int a. It is not equal to the 0 argument. So but in case you are using int is equal to 0, that means there is no any argument in the parenthesis. So we can use the comment line as the constructor without arguments. And for this syntax we can use one simple example. The example, maybe your class name is the student. Okay, if you are using any class name as the student, that means here the class name, so I am going to write as the student, and scope resolution operator as it is, and later again I am going to use the class name. Why? Because we know that very important note, the class name, constructor name should be the same. So student, scope resolution operator, student, open close, that is equal to int is equal to 0. Clear this point? And later opening of the flower bracket and closing of the flower bracket. So this is called as the outside class definition syntax. Clear? How you are thinking it's a, or how you are identifying it's a outside class definition. Why? Because we know that in outside class definition we using the operator. The operator is the scope resolution operator. So just only to complete the example, our syntax of the default constructor, I used the scope resolution operator, student, scope resolution operator, student, open close. Okay, so this is the one example of the outside class definition by using default constructor. And second example show inside class definition. Why? Because in our inside class definition, how we are using, just we are going to take the special member function name that is called as the student. Clear this point here? So directly we are going to define. Okay, here there is no any declaration. There is no any declaration by using their data type. Directly we are going to define our constructor function here. So the constructor function, if you are using the class name as the student, then student, open close, opening of the flower bracket and closing of the flower bracket. So this example for our outside class definition, and this example for our inside class definition by using the class name student. Okay, by using the syntax of the default constructors. And later some important note about our default constructor. So what are the important note in our default constructor? The first note, when user defined class, if any class does not contain explicit constructor. Clear this point here? It does not contain the explicit constructor. So what about the explicit? That means here maybe if it is explicit constructor, that means int is equal to a or int is equal to b. Clear this point here? So that means explicitly we using the value for the a, and explicitly we are using the value for our b in this case. So this is the example for the explicit constructor. That means explicitly, openly we are using the value here. But also we can say that when user defined class, if any class does not contain explicit constructor, then our compiler automatically invoking it is a default constructor. Correct? No, kya? If you are not using any value in the bracket within the parenthesis here, maybe the value is, for example, example, maybe the value is the 10 or the 40. Okay, if you are using 10 and 40, it is the example for the explicit constructor. If you are not using any value, that means it is the implicit constructor. Later words we are providing some value here. So when class does not contain explicit constructor, then a compiler automatically deciding, invoking, calling, it is a default constructor. It is the first note. And the second note, we can say that declaring a constructor with the argument, whether it is called as the default constructor, the question is about, or the note we can say that declaring a constructor with the argument, that means it going to hide which constructor? It going to hide the default constructor. Clear this point here? It hiding our default constructor. So if any in our class, if you are going to declare the constructor with the arguments, that means it going to hide our default constructor. Why? Because what's the meaning of the default constructor? The meaning of the default constructor, it does not contain any arguments. Okay, that means a constructor which does not accept any argument or zero argument constructor is called as the default constructor. And later next one, some features, the features of the default constructors. Okay, so what are the features we need to know in our default constructor? So the first thing, whatever, or we can say that for every object created, if any object, why? Because we already know if any class, if you are going to declare any class, surely it going to use some of the constructor special member function, and the constructor special member function declaring the object, and such a special member function is using to initialize the value to the object here. So the first thing, for every object created here, this constructor is automatically called. Which constructor? If any object going to create in the class, on that time only the compiler calling or invoking or calling the constructor member special member function. So this is the first note about, or the we can say as the features of the default constructor. So the first features of the default constructor, whenever any class going to declare or create any object, on that time only the compiler calling or invoking the constructor special member function. So the for every object created, this constructor is automatically called. And later next one, this second point, why? Because this is very important point about the default constructor. All object of a class are initialized the same set of value by the default constructor. So what's the meaning of about this one? Why? Because all object of a class are to be initialized the same set of value by the default constructor. Maybe when you are going to use the value, why? Because here the object 1 is there. Okay, the object 1, and maybe we are going to take the object 2. So in a class we already defining two objects. The objects are obj1 and obj2, and in obj1 some of the values, data variables are there, that is a and b, and in object 2 also the objects, that means here variables, class variables are there, that is or that are our a and b here. And just only for a I am using the value 10, and for the b I am using the value as the 20. In our object 1 I used two data variables. The data variables are a and b, and I initialize some value to the a and b, that is a is equal to 10 and b is equal to 20. And in our object 2 also some data variables, that is the a and b, and I am initializing some value to the a and b, that is 10 and 20. So just only whatever I completed, that is the meaning of our second features of the default constructor. So all the object of a class are initialized the same set of value by the default constructor. Clear this point here? Maybe the obj1 a is there, and in our obj2 in that also the a is there, but also we need to initialize the same set of value by the default constructors. So this is why, because the a in maybe a, or maybe the object 3 is there, and in that also two data variables are there, the data variables A and B, and in our object 3 also maybe any A and B is there. I am initializing the A value as 10 and B value as 20 only. So this is about our this second note. All object of a class are initialized same set of value by the default constructor. And the third note we can say that if different objects are to be initialized with the different values, it cannot be done using default constructor. Maybe object 1 AB and the value for A 10 and 20, object 2 AB are there here, and maybe if you are going to use the A value as 40 and B value as the 60. Clear this point here. In object 1 A value is 10, B value is 20, and in our object 2 A value is 40 and B value is 60 here. Such value we can't use by using our default constructor. So just only here we can say that if different objects are to be initialized different values, okay, the different objects are to be initialized with the different values, such value or it cannot be done by using our default constructor. Thank you.